Welcome again, everyone. Welcome back to the live podcast. I am your host, Faith. And if this is your first time here listening with us today, we would like to welcome you to the show. Now, if you are returning back to the show, we also want to welcome you back. Today, our podcast, our interview, and our topic here is something that we all somehow find ourselves struggling with. And I myself have struggled with this as well. It's part of being a human, our humanity, right? And that's having experienced trauma or traumatic experiences. And that may come in different shape and form, but we all have some type of trauma in some form in our lives. And, especially with the pandemic, we have probably all felt like we have more of that now than ever before. Man. So I wanted us to speak about, like, focus a little bit more about this topic, which is you know traumatic childhood and how we are able to navigate that, because once we become adult, the trauma doesn't stop, right? Because we are physically not hurting anymore doesn't mean we no longer have it's not attached to us, right? And some of us, it's trauma becomes more of a generational thing, right? That is could be passed down. Um so I there's a phrase that I like. It says, I need to heal so that my family, so that my kids don't have to heal from me, and that's powerful. I'm not sure who said that quote, but it's a beautiful quote that I read recently. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce to you all our guest today. So Emily is joining us from Florida, and I believe that's what I could call it, a sunny state, because it's beautiful and sunny always. Now, Emily is a mother. She's an advocate for changing generational trauma, and I think the reason why to me, I feel like that's a perfect title for her, because she's also went through that. So she knows, right? Who's better to help someone else than that already had that experience prior to. So she's also an author of an amazing book, guys. And she authored this book, and it's titled Mother's Trauma. Okay. And also, and through this book, of course, she's trying to help break that cycle of, generational trauma in the families. And so if you're somebody who may be looking for, a book, something that can kind of help you, guide you, and just kind of learn from her own experience with how she was able to break the cycle, of generational trauma, and then do better, right, for her case and her kids. Well, we're going to go right into the show, and I want to welcome you, Emily, to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. I appreciate you having me here. I'm happy to share my story and hopefully encourage other people and let them know that they're not alone in dealing and learning how to heal from their generational trauma that was passed down to them.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think what a time such as this, with so many things. I feel like every day when we watch the news, we're being traumatized, like, or just being a human being alone, just being in the environment. You have some way, somehow you're being exposed to trauma, right? Whether it's from your family or whether it's from where your work environment is, and all of those things. So I'm excited for ready to get into this topic today. Now, I also wanted to know that everybody know that what we're talking about today, this is based on Emily's own experience. Of course, she's not any type of, she's never proclaimed that she's like an expert or what you call it on all this on the psychological effect of trauma, but she will be able to give us her own life experience based on how she's been able to maneuver and be able to seek healing, things like that. And I think we can learn from anybody's stories. That's what I think. You don't have to be a doctor per se, right? And I think the best experts sometimes are the ones that have lived it, right? Lived the experience also. So I know I wanted to start back from from your childhood. How was it growing up with your mom and your family?
Sure. So growing up as a child, especially when I was very young, it was difficult. There was a lot of chaos in our house, a lot of yelling, a lot of emotional manipulation, and just the yelling. I mean, I remember as a small child, the yelling really caused a lot of chaos for me in my world. And I learned very quickly to be a quiet mouse, and to read the room so I knew if it was safe to approach or not. So it was, challenging
Yeah.
as a child to learn to maneuver around someone else's emotions,
Yeah.
because then I wasn't taught how to deal with my own because I was too busy worrying about my biological mom's emotions and how that was going to affect my day.
Wow. So when I know when you said just that you were worried more about your own well-being, you're focused more on your mother's reaction to things. Um, was she somebody that you would say was he loving and in any way, or was it just more like a consistent traumatic experience from her side?
I mean, she was definitely loving when she was able to,
Hmm.
but those times were far less than the chaotic times.
Yeah.
So of course I do have memories of my mother, being loving, but the traumatic events were more often and much larger. So
Mm.
that affected me a lot more. Yeah, than the loving times.
And that I wanted to ask that because I know sometimes, even though we're talking about trauma, I wanted to also highlight the fact that we all somehow, there's always that moment or that time when you may have felt love from her, and I want to also highlight that too because
Of course.
it's life is not just always. Sometimes in some cases he'll feel like that, especially if you're a young kid and you consistently feel like stress and traumatic experience. It feels like life is just gloomy and dark, but I'm glad that you shared that she there was those times where she was able to, with a little strength she had and a little bit of what she knew how to love, she was able to show that to you, which is important to share too.
Yeah.
So I know many of us today, we are caught in the cycles of generational trauma without even knowing that that's what we're in, right? Because we're just going through
Mhm.
our day-to-day life and trying to just move through life. But did you have any idea of your mother's like past? Was there anything that you knew of that maybe growing up now that you could see, oh my gosh, like I see why she was this way?
Yeah, for me, growing up, I did not have the understanding. Um, During my journey to healing,
Hmm.
and breaking the generational cycle, for me to be able to forgive, which is the best way to heal,
Hmm.
for myself, anyways, I needed understanding. And so I did go down the path and the road
Hmm.
of discovering why she was the way she was,
Yes.
and where it all came from.
Hmm.
Because for a very long time, I always, especially as a child, I blamed myself. I took that burden onto myself. And so
Yeah.
in order for me to heal, I needed to forgive. And in order for me to forgive, I needed to understand.
Mm.
And so I didn't find that until I was an adult, and on my own path and journey to healing.
That's beautiful, and I think understanding is such a big part of healing. You cannot hear something you don't understand or you don't know the
Right.
course of it. And I think that's what you said about um, forgiveness. I resonate very much with that because it's as I won't say a victim, but as a person who experienced trauma, a childhood trauma. I mean, it's an immense battle to consistently try to feel as though you are hoping and wanting to, not stay within that place of hurt, but yet
Mhm.
still wanting to find love, and
Mhm.
be love and share love with other people. So when you are so that's it for so when love is like scarce, like, right, because when you're going through hard times and you feel like you don't feel love, especially if it's a mother or family member um that's not showing you that love, and then you feel all this tension sometimes. Like you said, your house sometimes not a safe place to be,
Mhm.
because it's always this high, and then you know, all this there's always this low. So how do you learn, or how did you learn how to love, um, or how to share love, being that you grew up in a place that was not ideal in a way? How were you able to find love and then share love?
Sure, sure. Well, while I was a young adult, I thought I knew how. This was before I healed. While I thought pushing down my
Hmm.
wounds,
Yeah.
made them go away. And so I did go through a lot of unhealthy relationships where I was not giving healthy love, and I was also not receiving healthy love.
Hmm.
So after I looked within myself and I found worthiness within myself, then I was able to see and attract and
Hmm.
give healthy love. And so really for me, therapy, a lot of
Hmm.
therapy,
Hmm.
and a lot of learning how to love myself,
Yes.
and understand that I am worthy and I am deserving of safe and
Hmm.
healthy love. So for me, that was important because I was, in a lot of unhealthy relationships and friendships, and
Hmm.
keeping
Yep.
toxic family members in my life as well. And once I found that within my own self, then it changed my world.
That's beautiful to know that it's always, I think sometimes when we are feel like we're broken, we're waiting for someone else to come and bring the tape and bring all the
Yes.
tools that we need to
Right.
piece us back together in the whole.
Hmm.
In the hindsight, it's like it all comes from within. It's you,
Yeah. Yeah.
and something else that I heard recently, it says you are not responsible for the brokenness in you, but you are responsible for pulling those pieces back together. And
Yeah.
I mean, that definitely is true. Um,
Hmm.
and I think also with therapy. So how long have you been in therapy, or are you still in therapy?
I'm not currently at the moment in therapy. I do have some friends who are kind of like my therapist,
Yeah.
but I have been in and out of therapy uh, at least 4 years now, and where I was committed. I've done therapy before, but it wasn't
Consistent.
almost like willingness. I just was doing it because I felt I had to. So
Mm.
so those times and experiences didn't stick,
Yeah.
because I wasn't open to receiving um, what I was hearing. So seriously taking my therapy was probably for the past 4 years. And yeah.
And I think too, did you find it hard, like finding the right person, or because I think therapy also it's about relationship, like with the therapist too. At least I'm finding that now. And like you, I've been kind of scared, like scarcely coming in and out of therapy. Honestly, I haven't had like a full consistent therapy. And I think
Mhm.
I'm now trying to get back into it too. And I think, and it's really hard because sometimes you almost like push it aside, or you feel discouraged if you don't feel connected to that person that's doing the work, or you don't feel like it's moving or any type of change is happening, which sometimes there is change. We just expect like a drastic thing sometimes, at least I did. And then we just kind of slowly kind of stop going to therapy.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
now it's like, okay, when I'm going back down, and I'm like, I gotta find someone else or something. So so
Yeah.
what have you been able to do like within those 4 years to kind of motivate yourself and keep pushing yourself to find that therapist, or to keep going for the sake of your own well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, again, I just kind of usually look within, and I know like I'm learning to like recognize my own, like if I'm starting to feel like depressed, or my
Hmm.
anxiety is rising, or my triggers are just really sensitive, then I know it's time like to get ahead of it, before, so that it's time to seek a new therapist. And I agree, sometimes it is difficult and can be discouraging when you're looking for a new therapist and it's not a right fit, because it does happen. um, but to
Absolutely.
just to keep moving forward, because at the end of the day, when you do find the right therapist,
Mhm.
again, it can be totally life changing. Like they can really, really help you through your trauma or your depression or your anxiety or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's very true. Like don't give up on yourself, right? Because we
yeah,
tend to do
yeah.
that. So going back to your own childhood experience, I know you said a lot of your childhood trauma was it physical trauma that you experienced, or was it more like a emotional trauma? How would you
It was more emotional trauma, a lot of manipulation, um, neglect. We weren't given the emotional neglect, where we weren't
Mhm.
given the space, and we weren't taught how to, how to be loved and feel loved, and how to deal with our own emotions as children. Children have big emotions. They have very big emotions. And it's our job as a parent, or I take it my job as a parent, to teach my kids that all these emotions are okay.
Mhm.
All of them, the good, the bad, the ugly, and it's how you deal with them. So yeah, I was also emotionally neglected. And then ultimately, around the age of 12, our mother abandoned us. She left, and she's told us she was going to be gone for 2 weeks. And then
Mhm.
over a year later, um, a whole year wondering where she was, when we were going to
Mm.
see her again. Then she came back into our lives, in a very small capacity. But
Mhm.
so there was also the abandonment, that came into that as well, which was
It's
that, I think
hard.
that might have been probably the hardest part of it all.
Mhm.
Because that abandonment for me, like, I struggle with that in a lot of relationships, because I have that fear I'm going to be abandoned again.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, that one really left a big wound.
Yeah. So I mean, when you have that, disconnect from her, from your mother, were there other people around you, like a community, a father, or somebody figure that was there to, a support system to help you kids? Or was your
Yeah, I
mom?
mean, my father was still there, so it was my two older brothers, and my father then left
Mhm.
to figure out how to be this family of four. Um, and so that was a whole learning curve. And then I still have my grandparents, and I had lots of friends, and one of my neighbors, I was at their house all the time.
Yes.
He was my best friend, and his mom was so great. And like, I pretty much just lived at their house because it was an escape.
Yeah. Isn't it awesome to know, like, there are so many, sometimes, the people that we feel either love or connected to sometimes may not be within our own, within our own family. So I think
Yeah,
that's beautiful to hear that you didn't have a mother around for that amount of time. You said about a year. But your father was there, and he was probably showing you guys and trying to do what he can to be that. But it's different, it's still that you still feel like it's like a family is like a puzzle, right? And when
mm,
all those pieces fit in together, it works beautifully. But when some of those pieces are missing, in your case, your mom, it becomes things, it's just, you have that piece that is built, until you have that abandonment will continue to grow, and that feeling of rejection, which is then
yeah,
carried into your adulthood. um
mm,
I know much about this too, because I felt abandoned too when I was, not to compare your story with mine, but I like to
mhm,
sometimes just share my own story along with my guests,
sure.
so that way people know that, we all have similar human experiences sometimes. Maybe not as, it can never be the same, of course. But I know how that feeling is like. And even when you grow up and you become an adult, and you feel like, oh man, you feel like sometimes, it was just 1 year, it's okay then. But you still have that longing. It's like you miss, and then even though you have love from your neighbor, your dad, and it's just something is missing, and it's like that
Mhm.
that melody touch and something. And I know how that feels like. So when you felt like that, when you were now becoming an adult, Emily, did you feel like that abandonment, that rejection part of your childhood, did it creep in some way, somehow? How was that, like dating and things like that?
So I'm sorry, I was distracted. Can you repeat the question? I was looking over
No,
here.
yeah, no worries. I was saying that, with abandonment comes a lot of rejection,
Oh,
feeling of
yes.
rejection, I'm sorry. And so when you grew up and now you're starting to date, I'm sure, um,
Hmm.
did that abandonment feeling that you felt as a child from your mom, did that somehow carry over to your child, to your adulthood and with
Oh, yeah.
relationships?
Yeah, it definitely carried over into my relationships, even in my friendships as well.
Hmm.
Especially with my romantic relationships, I was seeking this love, but I wasn't receiving it.
Mm,
I wasn't healthy, so I wasn't able to receive healthy love, and I always had a fear of being left again, of being abandoned. And so I
yeah.
was very fearful in a lot of my relationships,
Mm,
of the same pattern happening of me being left.
yeah. And I think too, like, in a way, it wasn't your fault because you didn't know how to
Right.
receive that type, a love. Because a lot of way we learn how to accept and receive love and how to give love,
Hmm.
it stems from our environment, and then
Yeah.
how we watch people cultivate that love and how it's being distributed through the dynamics of our loved ones and things like that. So yeah, it definitely wasn't your fault that you didn't have that part of it. So when you felt like you were searching in the wrong places to probably get that love that you are missing.
Hmm. Yeah.
And yours, you said, was through religion. You were searching for people that you feel can keep you safe,
Yeah.
but sometimes it wasn't really the right choice. How
Right.
did you go from that to mindset to feeling like I feel abandoned? I'm looking for someone to fix me, and I'm looking for someone to fill in this hole and this gap, and remove some of this rejection from my heart. How did you overcome that to know, like, you know what? I should stop looking for somebody to come in and fill me. I need to find another way to fill myself up.
Yeah. So for me, I wasn't ready to face that. I kept looking for people to fill
Mhm.
that gap for me, and it was always just a temporary fix.
Mm,
And it never stuck, like duct tape over a
yeah.
leaking pipe. It's not a permanent fix. And I didn't realize that until I started having kids of my own. And I
Mhm.
was really faced with the fact that I was unhealed. And then I was so afraid of becoming my biological mom and doing the same thing to my own children and continuing that generational cycle
Mhm.
of trauma. And
Yeah.
so again, with the therapy, I had to go so deep within myself. It was challenging. It was, some of the hardest work I've done was having to fill the
Expose.
hole myself.
Yeah.
um yeah.
And you're exposing your inner self, really. Because you gotta go
Yeah.
sometimes. You gotta go deep
Yeah.
to root some of those. You
Very
know.
vulnerable. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Was there any particular therapy or the modalities that you felt worked best for you? I know they have EMDR and so many other ones.
Hmm.
Was there a
For
specific?
me, it was talk therapy. That was really, I didn't realize the weight I was carrying around by keeping all of it and the
Mm,
trauma inside of me. And so being able to release that was a big weight. I mean, I truly physically felt lighter each and every
mhm.
time I went to talk therapy, and I had a safe space to just tell
Release it.
someone, the things that, we went through and how it affected me, and
Mhm.
how it made me feel. And then I was able to reflect on and feel the feelings,
Yeah.
and understand them, and understand that, okay, it's all right for me to be angry because of what happened to me. And that was like crazy to my brain, my emotions. I was
Mhm.
like overwhelming almost, to like
Right.
to be, it's okay to be mad, like like that was new to me. So just, yeah, my kids, they're the reason.
That's so beautiful because when you think about like what we just been talking about, the different experiences that led you to now seeing it in a different way and say, you know what? everything I've been through, the abandonment, the emotional trauma, and all of these things, you're thinking, you know what? Therapy has helped you so much, sounds like, and I'm hoping that will do the same for me too as I continue in the process.
Mhm.
You know, and so, and it's just seeing that, hearing that your kids also were your motivations, I would say, right? To,
Yes.
yeah, to get to that finish line a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. They are my motivation, my cheerleaders, you know.
Yeah. They're one of kids are wonderful cheerleaders, of course, and you know, sometimes they just have so much love, you know, and
Hmm.
that's what we need, and we can really
Yes.
never find that anywhere else. A kid's
Yes.
love. So when I think when we're going through and coping with the cycle of generational trauma, right? And how how can we as individual, do you think, in your opinion, Emily, how can we disrupt like the harmful patterns um, that we had built over times? Because what we learn is sometimes from our childhood we carry it into adulthood. For you, was therapy,
Hmm.
and then that was, I think you said, like it was able to kind of, and your kids were also a motivational fact that pushed you into breaking some of those patterns. Were there specific patterns that you felt like that you were trying, that you were able to get rid of now that you no longer deal with like before from your
Um,
childhood?
Yeah, so I used to try to cope in many different ways. I didn't realize at the time it was my
Mm-hmm.
attempt to self-regulate my own emotions and cope with them. You know, I went through a phase of self-harming, and I went through a phase of having an eating disorder, and then again toxic relationships. And for me, I don't know how I stopped doing those other than truly just learning to love myself.
Mm-hmm.
Again, find the worthiness within yourself. Um, Talk therapy isn't for everybody, but there are so many other resources out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's national hotlines for those things: eating disorders, depression,
Yeah.
and then you can also, you know, get into your local resources. So there are lots of other ways aside from talk therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I've been on this kick of reading like self-help books, you know, and they're motivating, and to find your power and find your purpose, and
Yeah.
those for me right now are my therapy. I find them very, very helpful.
Yes.
So, you know, there's lots of different ways. Sometimes it could just be your friendly neighbor down the road
Mm-hmm.
who you feel safe with and you feel comfortable with, and that
Yes.
can be a starting point. You know, to if you're safe there, and you feel like you can open up to them,
Yeah.
and there's always the possibility that they can, you know, help you find the resources that you might need.
That's
So
beautiful. Yeah. And I think I just wanted to kind of dive in now into the book because I think this book is very powerful. And as far as I know, sometimes it's just, you know, when we think of trauma, we always sometimes just attribute it, like we just put it in the box of physical trauma, you know,
right.
and that it's natural to do that, right? Because it's, you can see the physical effect of, you know, of a physical abuse that creates trauma for the person. But I love that in your book, this book is mostly focusing on a lot of it's like the aspect of, I mean, the emotional side of it, and you highlight the emotional trauma of abandonment that we spoke about a lot just now, and then also, but one thing that I find that I love, there's a quote in your book, like you said, and again, the book we're speaking of is the title "Mother's Trauma," right? And you said, "quote You can learn from trauma rather than live in it." Right. And I want to kind of have you explain a little bit what you mean by that.
Sure, that is my motto these days. So you can learn from your trauma and not live in it. And by
Hmm.
that, I mean, for me, it was again finding understanding
Yes.
and then learning why these things happened, Because if you understand why, or for me, I understood why I was able to let go of the negative feelings I had toward it.
Yes.
And I was able to bring more positive feelings into my life because I was able to just let it go, to forgive and move forward instead of staying in it and just living in it was a sad time in my life. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, I love the quote because it's with everything you said, I definitely agree with, and it's like not wanting to live in that past,
Right.
and
Right.
most of the time um you can't keep looking back,
Mhm.
and I see myself doing that a lot sometimes, honestly, and I think it's just a part of the human nature. We want to feel like not sorrowful, but we want to reopen that wound and be like, okay, wow, like this
Yeah.
really was hurtful. But it's like, I love that you're saying like, you can learn from your trauma, and that's the goal is, you learn from it, and then you give it purpose from that
Yeah.
knowledge that you gain. And I think your purpose now is this book, right? You're sharing your story about your own trauma there, and then that's going to help a lot of people too, you know. Um, which I love so much.
Thank you.
Yes. So we talk a lot today about, how Emily went from, experiencing emotional trauma and abandonment. And a lot of us out there, if you guys are feeling anything like this, just know, there will be a time where, with therapy and support and things like that, hopefully you'll be able to move forward a little bit more each day, to find that love within yourself and not seek that love that was never there and wasn't meant to be there in the first place,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
I think sometimes we think our parents are meant to be with us forever, but that's not the case,
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
God
Yeah.
put us here, and then he's the ultimate father, and I guess for all of us in a way.
Yeah.
So we got to just look towards that also for our heavenly Father for guidance and things. Um, so on the show we done a new thing that we started here, and it's called Last Three. So this is, Emily, where we ask, like, I guess a last three questions, right?
Okay.
And you just answer how you like in the moment, okay, whatever your heart
Sure.
tells you to. And so the first question I like to ask you is, how did you find and connect to your own voice?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, it wasn't a moment. I'm not quite sure I can I can give you like an exact moment or a
Mhm.
reason or how. It was a slow progress for me, until of growing and healing, and finding my voice was also very healing. So for me, it was just a slow progress of healing all the other old wounds, turning them into scars. And then I was able to find my voice, because who doesn't want to hear a cool story about your scars, like shark bites and. So I was able to turn my wounds into scars, and then I felt safe enough to
Yeah,
talk about it. Mhm.
that's wonderful. And second question is, what are you most proud of? I would say right now or anytime.
Sure. I am most proud of how open I communicate and my children communicate with each other. That's been so important for me, is the open communication. My daughter will at any point in time, if I'm making a weird face, say, "Mommy, are you frustrated?" And she's 4. And for her to feel safe enough to ask me if I'm frustrated and for us to talk about it is my most proud thing that I've accomplished
That's
for today.
beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. Kids, we learn from so much from them. And I think that just shows too that you've been working with them to teach them the emotional intelligence, which is recognizing those emotions and expressing them when they needed to be, instead of holding them in. And that way they
Yes.
don't take any shapes and forms of different, traumas, mental health problems and stuff, issues.
Yes.
And then last questions I have, a question that I have for you is, what is one life lesson you have learned along your journey this far?
Oh, one life lesson. I would say that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be struggling. And it's okay to ask for help.
Love that. It's so true. We cannot do everything alone.
That's right. That's right.
You know, that's why we have God to help us, and then we have families and everybody if
That's
we
right.
just ask. And then last but not least, Emily, just tell us a little bit about like how our listeners can, follow on and find your book, The Mother's Trauma, and whatever else, other things that you're doing
Sure. Thank
to
you. Yeah.
support you.
So if you'd like to reach out, you can either hop on my website. It's emilylbowers.com. From there, you can purchase the book. You could also find Mother Trauma on Amazon. And if you feel like you just need someone to reach out to, you feel maybe connected to my story, you can email me at emily@mothertrauma.com. And moving forward, I'm trying to use my book as a platform. I'm getting into our local mental health places around here so I can hopefully work with local, children, teenagers,
Mhm.
parents, whomever it might be, who might feel more comfortable opening up to someone who's maybe not. I'm not a licensed therapist, but because I have lived experience, I'm hoping that maybe some people will feel more comfortable
Mhm.
in contacting me and allowing me to help them in whatever ways they need. So thank you so much for having me. This has been so wonderful.
Of course, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Emily. And I think you're doing great things, and you have a big heart, and a lot of things. A lot of people will be inspired by your journey, and I hope that our listeners can go in and purchase the book and just read it and get their own, and then make sure you share it with friends and family too, because
Absolutely. Yeah,
this is a story that we all. I think every pieces of that can be applied to some of our lives too. Um, well, thank you guys all for coming in and listening to the show today with us and being here. As we always say here, lift a voice. Remember to find, try to work out finding your voice. And then once you find that voice, it's then once you connect to it, it's then using it as a way to have other people give them the space to be able to find their voice and encourage them to do that, and however means you can. I think it's so important that we connect the doc to our human experience always as we can. Well, thank you guys all for tuning in. We'll see you soon.